Welcome everyone to another Employee Experience Experts webinar series. Today, super excited to be featuring Sonia Rose, who currently is at Pure Storage, supporting leading employee communications and experience. Before we dive in real quick, thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jade, one of the co-founders of Epoch. Epoch's an employee experience software. So why we host these webinar series is because a lot of you all often turn to us asking what best practices are or some challenges that other folks are seeing within the space. So we thought, what better way to tackle this on than featuring folks that are actually doing this day in, day out. So with that said, today, you all will be learning from Sonia, who brings more than 10 years of experience doing employee experience engagement at companies like Meta, Workday, and now at Pure Storage. And Sonia really has seen it all in our prep conversations leading up. It's super cool just to learn from Sonia how she's really seen employee experience and engagement before it really was a token term and such a priority across so many organizations. So you'll be learning lots in terms of what's been happening in the past and how that has really impacted in terms of priorities today and how we can really tackle on what employee experience means in this day and age. But before we dive in, it'd be great if everyone here listening could drop in the chat how you're feeling today as an emoji. It can be anything fun or silly. And as you all choose the emoji that you want to put into the chat right now, I'll quickly overview what you'll be hearing about today. So you'll be learning about how to use feedback and data to better understand employee experience, new ways that you can be approaching employee engagement, and much, much more. But with that said, we'll dive right in. So before we start with our line of questions that we prepared today, Sonia, would love to just hear from you in terms of your introduction and really how you entered the space and how you've been experiencing it.
Yeah, absolutely. First, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Like you mentioned, I've been in the space before the space was a thing. In my, for me, it started with my customers' experience back in the day in retail. And I start with that because when you learn about what it's like to be in service to others, like that carries with you forever. Eventually, I was able to take that into a corporate environment and was working at Gap Inc., doing all of the sales incentives for the sales associates. So that was my first kind of taste of it when I didn't even really know what it was called, right? I was just a program manager that was doing this work. So have been fortunate enough to be able to have done this work in the retail sector, in financial services, as well as tech. And so the evolution has come quite a ways, but now the term is out there. And I think that the pandemic, for better or worse, has really highlighted the importance of this role for organizations. And so I'm thrilled to be able to, before I couldn't find my people, like, where are they? And now it's like they're everywhere. So that's fantastic.
It's awesome, Sonia. And I guess like a great starting question is just because we've been seeing a lot of teams right now that are thrown into this employee experience role. Often they're either the first one within their companies because with the pandemic, it just created the need for this role. Or maybe the company now is recognizing it's something that they need to prioritize. So for folks that are very new to this role or really have to establish it within the organization, like how do you think about that? I know from your experience, we talked about how you all really branded this at Workday and you view it in a very special way too.
Yeah, it's funny, during my time at Workday, I was the first person hired to do internal communications. And anytime you're the first at anything, you have to recognize that there are people that are already there that are doing this kind of work in some capacity, although they may not officially have that title. So I think for me, it was really trying to establish the brand of what my team was going to be, starting as that team of one, and what my capabilities were and what I could offer up to the organization, while also being very mindful of the bandwidth of being that, the lonely only, doing the work, right? So I didn't want to, stretch myself too thin. But as my team grew, obviously, creating a mission of what we were about. This is how we serve the organization. This is how, we're supporting the company's, priorities or their OKRs. Establishing all of that framework at the beginning was very critical for the success of the team. And as we started doing more, we started really branding ourselves as a team, right? our team with our team name. We made sure every event that we did had our team name associated with it. People started to know who we were. They looked forward to our messages because they knew like good stuff was happening when they saw messages from the team. So it's that branding and marketing that I can't emphasize enough in those early days of starting up what that group that you're forming and what it is that you're trying to do for the company. And then extending what you do. So it's not just what you do inside and celebrating and communicating it, but also getting out there externally and saying it as well. So on LinkedIn or working with your PR team to make sure that those messages are getting out, because all of this helps the employer brand overall, which is an added benefit to the company.
That's awesome. And actually, I recently spoke with someone that was tasked to kind of highlight what the mission of their team was, and her title is employee experience. So how would you think about that in terms of like the mission and values of what it means to be an employee experience within an organization?
I think, when I think of employee experience, I feel it's like it's all around you. It's the culture and the environment. It's like the air you breathe when you're at work, right? So when I think about what that mission means to me, it's like my job is to wow and delight employees each and every day. Because we spend so much of our time at work every day. You want to make it a great experience, right? I want to be able to influence those tabletop conversations that happen after work when someone says, how was work today? Or what's going on at work? Like, I want to be able to know that the work that I'm doing is influencing. So it's really about, to me, surprise and delight, because who doesn't like, experiencing some wow factor when they go into work? So it's not just checking in and checking out. It's what you do for them while they're there that I think is incredibly important.
And for you, Sonia, I'm curious, where does employee experience fall under within the greater organization?
So where I am now, it falls within human resources, but I've been in other companies where it's like it's in operations, or there might be a specific business unit that has, an arm that's focused on employee experience. So the fact that companies are even putting wherever the position is placed, the fact that they have the position, I think is what's most important. I do love being part of HR because of the global influence of knowing every program that I do, that I'm touching every employee around the world, whether they work in an office or they work from home. So I think that my sweet spot, I feel, is like in this HR space.
Yeah, and I know earlier, Sonia, you talked about how all the work you do not only influences day to day of how an employee experiences their work, but also like employer brand. So like what happens externally. And I know one thing that you've done an incredible job at is completing the Great Places to Work application at Workday and now at Pure Storage. So for those who don't know, could you share a little bit about what Great Places to Work is and like why is it important? What are some learnings that you had from doing this exercise or application a few times now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, great place to work. You should actually look them up and follow them if you're not. But they are actually the survey behind what ultimately gets published as the Fortune 100 best companies to work for. And so companies, it's like the Academy Awards for companies to be featured on the Fortune 100 list. So it's an extensive process to go through to get on the list. But the first part of that process is becoming Great Place to Work certified. So if you see companies that are touting that they're Great Place to Work certified, that means that they care about this space first and foremost. They've surveyed their employees and provided that information to Great Place to Work. And they've provided details about the company, about its practices related to benefits, recruiting, you name it. Like they're in it, and they have data from literally thousands of companies that they have within their database that ultimately will help people, will help them decide who gets placed on the Fortune 100 list. So when you see companies that are on that list, it's a big deal because it shows that they're caring about their employees and the experience. And Great Place to Work is also a global company as well. So there are lists in other countries. If you have locations elsewhere, you can apply to be on those lists as well. And I can say, as someone who has worked on the application numerous times, it is a heavy lift, but it is so rewarding at the end because when you're doing all of this great work, It's just a matter of like cultivating and pulling it together and putting it in an application and sharing. And I think when you read all of those things, it's really heartwarming to me to see all of the things that the company and the employees are doing to really create that great environment.
Yeah, especially because I know when you first started at Pure Storage, you dived right into creating this application for them, which sounds like the best catalyst and really leveling up your learning of the company culture and who everyone is.
Yeah, it was a great indoctrination. The team had already started the work, so and they were
Yeah.
heavily involved, and I just
Mm,
came in kind of towards the end. I think I was 2 weeks before the
nice.
deadline, and I was like, how can I lean in and help? And based off of my experience and working at Workday and helping Deb get on the list, like what can I do here? So it was a lot of feedback and collaboration, but ultimately we're really proud of what we were able to submit.
And one thing as well, Sonia, like there's a lot of folks that are tuning in or might be watching this later that are within career transitions that either want to break into the employee experience space or are now looking for new organizations to join. I know you mentioned that looking out for the great place to work tag is a great understanding of if an organization cares about those items. But I guess like even for yourself, I know you recently moved into Pure Storage or now it's been a few months. Do you just have any advice for folks that are looking at their next role? What kind of questions would you encourage folks to like think about or just things to consider when looking at different companies to join?
Oh yeah, great question. I feel I'm really well versed as someone who, full
Yeah.
disclosure, I was one of the 21,000 folks to be laid off from Meta. And I think that although it was very, sad at the time, I think I ended up where I should have ended up. So everything happens for a
Yeah.
reason, and certainly that was part of my journey. But I think one of the things when you're thinking about going in and applying for jobs, the market is incredibly tough right now. I can attest to that. I applied to 155 roles, and I had 17 interviews. And through all of those interviews, I was interviewing companies as much as they were interviewing me, because it's a big decision when you're going and, if you're going to spend a chunk of your day at an organization, you want to make sure that, you fit in, that you have the right vibe, that it's mutually beneficial. And I can say that, when I had those conversations and, always be prepared to ask questions. I had a laundry list of questions and they were different for everybody that I spoke to. First of all, I looked them up on LinkedIn. I found out more about their backgrounds. I looked to see what recommendations they received to show what kind of caliber person they were, as well as what they recognized in others through the recognitions that they gave to others, to see what they valued, right? I wanted to see like what sort of chemistry we would have in that way. I also spent a good chunk of time making sure that when in the interview process, that one of the first questions I asked was about culture and making, tell me about, your company values are these things. Can you tell me how that looks like and how that manifests for you? Like I was hoping they would story tell and share with me what that looked like. And that was, very interesting because you would find out how they, first of all, if they were connected to their values. And then, how their stories manifested told me a lot about what the inside workings of the companies was that I was talking to. So those were two key things. And then finally, when the interview was, towards the end, I wanted to make sure I didn't leave any cards on the table. And I would ask them just straight up, like, I'm like, so, I know I shared a lot with you today. I really want to make sure that you have no outstanding questions. Is there anything that I need to double click on to share with you? So I just want to make sure you have a full understanding of me and my capabilities and what I can bring to your organization. And so, I think a lot of people were floored by some of these, deep questions that I was asking. But at the end of the day, this is my livelihood. This is, where I want to spend my time. And so I wanted to make sure that it was beneficial.
Totally. That's super helpful, Sonia. And I guess like with that one last question, kind of for those who are like in career transitions, I know the big thing for employee experience, especially within the space that like you have been in, a lot of companies say they care about it, but then I'm sure there's some flags that you've identified as you were interviewing that kind of told you that a company might not actually be aligned with their values. Like, were there some things that like helped you understand that, or like, yeah, flags that you were looking out for just in case?
Well, I think, employee experience is very similar to candidate experience, right? And so for me, I looked at my candidate experience from the moment I entered their website to what I saw on their platform, what they had on their job posting, the language that they used. So I was judging all the entire time, right? And then from that moment of first interaction, throughout the hiring cycle or that candidate cycle. And I was taking notes because whatever company was ultimately going to hire me, I was going to make sure that I had, here's some things that we can, do better, or things that you guys are doing really great
I love
that I'm going to
that.
provide, because that candidate experience just goes right into what the employee experience is day one. So I think don't underestimate all of the things you're experiencing along the way. I mean, I had one interview that, I kid you not, was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the morning. It was an international company, and I got up, got ready to be at that 2 a.m.
Wow.
interview, and I was ghosted. So I was just like, okay, not the
Mm,
right company for me. But definitely
yeah.
keep in mind that every no that you hear, every rejection, that's just getting closer to your yes, and you're weeding out. And never feel forced to, say yes to a job just because you have that job offer. It could be, every situation is different, I recognize, but that was something that I just constantly reminded myself of, is that I know my worth and I know what I'm capable of. And, I have to find the right company for me.
I love that. And now, Sonia, now that you're at Pure Storage, what are some events or programs that's most exciting for you that's coming up, or like for the company and its culture?
Well, one that we're working on right now is Halloween. And, obviously Pierce color is orange. And here we have
True.
Halloween is all about orange as well. So we just launched our communications about the event last week. Or actually, it might have been the week before, but we are thrilled to be able to be hosting that. I think for many companies that have, in the pandemic, it shut down a lot of these engagement activities. And
Mhm.
so to have them back in person, just, it's a fantastic opportunity for colleagues to come together, to bond, to meet people that you've never met before. So we're really looking forward to a spectacular event.
What does that look like? Because Pure Storage is hybrid, right?
Yes. So that's such a great question, because we obviously, I'm based out of our headquarters. The event that I'm referring to is our headquarters. However, we do have offices globally, and we sent out a toolkit. So every office that would like to host something has the opportunity to do so, and we're giving them the tools that we're using, and we've created a toolkit to extend it to them as well. And for our remote population, really, and everyone really, we have a communication that we sent out that basically was highlighting, pumpkin carving contests that anyone can participate in, costume contests that anyone could participate in. And we'll curate all of those entries that we get, and we'll post on our Slack channel that's dedicated to Halloween. So if you join that channel, now, you would see some fun dad jokes. You would see I think there was a fun fact recently about candy corn and how many pounds of it is made every year. And,
Oh,
so we're just
wow.
trying to like build that community for those that want to get engaged and involved. Because we also recognize that Halloween might not be everyone's thing, or depending on your country, it might not be relevant, culturally appropriate. So we are just giving people the power of choice to choose. And, it's going to come to life in a way that's most meaningful to them.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's some like really strong considerations there, Sonia, like from like the global context to just like the power of choice. So when you're thinking about these initiatives or events, what are some big considerations that you always want your team to be thinking about before launching?
I think globally, one of the first things to know is that, obviously we are, a US based company headquartered in the US, but our footprint is global. So we need to have our pulse on what's going on in other office locations. So one of the first things that I did was get to know the office managers in our locations around the world, introducing myself to them, but also, letting them know that I am their, a trusted partner, advisor, and I want to hear from them. Like, I want to know what's working, what's not working. And so I can get, the feedback and start building a high trust relationship, because at the end of the day, there's my scope and influence can only go so far. You need people that are, on site to be able to help execute and extend the events that you do. So building those connections and that camaraderie is very important early on. And I think the other thing too is, don't think just about how you do things in the US. Think about learning about other cultures and what, like Halloween is not going to work everywhere. I absolutely recognize that. And so rather than, pushing and like everyone has to do this, it's like, no, let's think about things that are culturally relevant to that location. I often equate it to, and I explain it like when I think of McDonald's. McDonald's is a global organization. When you see those golden arches, you know what to expect. But if I go to Hawaii, I'm going to expect to see Spam on the menu and pineapple, because that's relevant, to the location. I think of our offices in that same way. There are things that are very, unique to their culture that we want to embrace. I remember working once with in office in Ireland, and we know how we celebrate St. Patrick's Day here. That is not how they celebrate it over there, right? And they're like, please don't send me a picture of a leprechaun, right? Like, so, but you won't know that until you have those conversations and seek to understand more about the culture.
Yeah, I think you touch on a lot of those points here, but we do have a Q&A that I think might be a good time to bring up as well. But again, I think we covered a lot, but in case there's anything else that we can touch on, Sonia, Diana here is wondering about how do we keep inclusivity year after year for certain employee experience initiatives?
That's a great question. When I think of inclusivity, when I think about great place to work, it's like being that great place to work for all. So I think it's important to understand how you can lean in. And, oftentimes companies will have employee resource groups. So to me, that is a great place to lean in to find out, like, what does inclusivity mean to you? What do you need more of from us? Because I think oftentimes, those that are in these planning spaces don't necessarily, like, there's a lot that goes into the details of planning an event, depending on the scale. And I can confidently say that I've done very small events to events for thousands of people. And they're, they say like the devil's in the details. It absolutely is. But, thinking about, for example, an accessibility, I remember doing an event and, someone was telling me, it's really great that you had like the sidewalks over here and then the grass area over here, but where you place things mattered, because, my wheelchair couldn't go through these pathways, and luckily in this instance, it worked out, but that was like an eye-opening thing for me, to make sure that I was like, I really need to be thinking about this more broadly, or, for example, someone that, is blind and has difficulty navigating around. What do you need to do for them? What do you need to do for them in a new hire perspective, orientation perspective? It's really thinking about like accessibility, because all of those things equate to inclusivity. And so I think leaning into the networks of folks that are there and finding out what their needs are, using engagement surveys, anywhere where you can gather those data points are going to be incredibly helpful as you navigate.
Yeah, I think that leads us nicely, Sonia, to our next point in terms of just understanding how you think about feedback from employees and really measuring success for some of these programs and initiatives. How have you, in your experience, tackled this?
Well, a lot of companies will do employee engagement surveys. And if they're not doing an employee engagement survey, to me, that would be a red flag, to be honest.
True.
So, usually it's a once a year activity. For those companies that are more progressive, they're going to do even more frequently. Maybe it's quarterly, but being able to get your hands on those results to understand how you can influence those results based off of the work that you do. So, we just recently closed an employee engagement survey, and the results were just released yesterday. And one of
So
the first
cool.
things I'm going to do is like go in, read all of the comments, and understand, where the employee sentiment is, and then know about the scope and capabilities of my team and how can we lean in to kind of help drive those metrics for the future. Because the great thing about these surveys is that
Mm.
they, because of the frequency in which you have them, you'll be able to see, are you moving the needle in any way at all? Or what you're doing, are you going to be stagnant, or is it unfortunately going to go down, right? So being able to lean in that space to understand, I think is really critical. From an event perspective, I'm a huge fan of striking while the iron is hot, and then making sure you're surveying right after your event. And not only for that net promoter score, like would they recommend the event, but also like all of the elements. What did they think of the food, the drink, the entertainment? I really break it down granularly so that we can learn and then leverage that as part of our postmortem. The other piece of that is taking all of the comments. And I do have to, they say that feedback is a gift, and it truly is. But oftentimes when you're reading the feedback, like it could sting, because you put
Yeah.
your heart and soul in what you're doing. And, people are just filling out the surveys, and, they might not be thinking about that there's a human that's going to be behind the scenes that are reading it. So certainly make sure you're in the right mindset to focus on what you're reading, because sometimes it does, it can sting. And I often have to remind myself and my teams that I've worked with to say, it's not like we're going to go to an engineer and like critique their code and be like, oh, that was terrible code, like we are putting ourselves in a very vulnerable position when we survey, but it's for the betterment of our programs. And I think the other thing I've seen over the years and years of doing this is that food is something that is very, very hard to win on. So any event that you do with food, I think employees might expect a Michelin star experience at times. I mean, I remember an event that we did that was at a theme park. So you're getting theme park food, right? And
Yeah.
it was just like, I can't believe that, you served ketchup next to a hot dog, right? Like, and it was just, is that trying to be funny? I don't know. But certainly trying to make sure that you understand that, look at the high level themes, right? And definitely look at the
Yeah.
negative comments because there's things to learn from it. But, just know that overall, like if the team has put their heart and soul in this, it's likely going to show up for most of the people that attend.
Yeah. I forget, what was it, you, Sonia, that had this advice, or someone who said that they would put on the surveys, like, here are the people that will be reading the
Yes.
surveys. Like, it'll be Sonia. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, do you want to describe to the audience how you all do that, like why you do that?
Yes. In the beginning, I talked about branding and why branding was so important. So at first, the branding
Yeah.
was the employee, was the name of the team, right? This is the team that's doing the work. And, there were those that knew who the team was by attending the events, and, we're all in like the matching shirts kind of thing. And then eventually when the feedback, turned to a point where it's like, wow, do they realize that people are actually reading this? It was the employee team name at the top, and at the bottom was our pictures. So our headshots were across the bottom. So we wanted them to know, like,
Yeah.
this event that literally happened for thousands of people, here are the people that made that come to life. So just as a gentle like nudge to remind them, like, there's humans back here. So be constructive because we absolutely want that, but also be kind.
Yeah. Especially, I think, like, when the surveys are anonymous, um, people get a bit too brave with their feedback. So I love that you have
Yes.
all humanize. And again, it's like not only humanizing and encouraging empathy from the other side, but also the branding piece is huge. Like, again, like end to end, this was like a team that really thought about putting this together.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I guess with, yeah, and with like the survey, Sonia, like, because you get so many, like, how do you decipher like what feedback makes sense, and like when to not be too reactive, and like what feedback you can kind of just like put aside and think about later?
So I think that, oftentimes when, people are giving feedback, they don't necessarily know like the logistical challenges that come with producing an event, right? So it's like when, we're like, okay, we're doing this company picnic. What suggestions? Do we always have open-ended questions? So I think it's really important to allow people just free form
Mm,
space to share. And it's like, what would you like to
yeah.
see for next year? And they're like, oh, I remember one was like, we should go to an apple orchard. And I'm like, I don't think an apple orchard is going to like logistically, I can't find one that, would be available for like a couple thousand people. Right.
Oh
So
my God,
it's
yeah.
like,
All the ladders, like.
I don't, yeah, there's safety concerns and, things to that effect. But I think it's like really looking at like what's tangible, things that you can react to, and some that are just completely out of scope because it's like there's limitations, right? And I think, people are used to going to smaller things or, maybe doing their own events at home and think that, what you do
Mm,
there can, manifest in a larger environment. And maybe some things are transferable, but other things just aren't. So it's just really looking at it. And, oftentimes I would take like the spreadsheet of data and it was just like, I would color code like, red is like, no, can't do. Yellow is like, maybe. And green is like, yes, absolutely. We can implement this in the future. And just kind of assessing it that
mm,
way. And then figuring out how you can leverage those in future events. The other thing to keep in mind too is that, ideas that you have now that may not come to fruition for various reasons doesn't mean you should scrap them completely. Just put them on the shelf. There have been many things that I have pitched, and it's like the timing may not have been right, but it's like I kept it there, and I'm like, okay, now's a good time for me to dust this off and reapproach, and then been able to use. Because I don't think there's any idea that truly is a bad idea. It's just ideas that maybe need to be cultivated a bit more before you can, make them go prime time.
love that. And someone did ask in terms of when you implemented adding photos and like a face to those who are going to be reading the surveys. Did anything change after that? Did you see any differences?
I think the comments were a bit softer. I certainly
Okay.
think, yeah. So they, we welcome that feedback. It's just a matter of like, you don't get tone or inflection when you're reading a comment necessarily. And I think sometimes depending on your own mindset when you're looking at it, like you could be reading into that, I can't believe they said that and how they said it. Maybe it's not even there.
Yeah.
Right. So it certainly felt a little bit better. And it felt better knowing that we put our faces there, to be honest.
I love that. And I guess like Sonia, I know you kind of mentioned it earlier just now, but in terms of like when you're selling an idea or like trying to get that executive leadership buy-in, how does that look like for you? Like what have you seen be successful for you, especially when it comes to like asking for budget, as I know that's very topical for many organizations right now, like conserving budget.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, the B word.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for me, one of the things that I like to do is create a pitch deck at the beginning
Oh, cool.
to make sure that I have general alignment. So when I think about a project, first thing I do is think of scope and sequence. How big is this going to be? What is the order in which things need to happen? So first things first, it's looking at the budget, the branding. Is this global? Is this not global? Asking some basic questions so that I can come up with what that pitch deck is going to look like. And so included in that would be basic logistics. What's the date, the time, the location? And I usually do that concurrently with looking at whoever I need to attend the event. Those that are like, maybe you have some executives or leaders that you're like, they have to be here, like doing that in coordination with their calendars to make sure
Oh,
that the
wow.
dates that you're planning are actually going to work out, right? And so
Yeah.
once I have this deck together that includes like very high level, it's just an executive preview of what it is that we would like to do. Budget is already secured, right? So it's a matter of making sure that it's the socialization is there and getting in front of the right people. And sometimes you can go, depending on the relationships you have, you can go directly to the leaders when you've established yourself. And it's like, here's the event, here's all the details, here's the communication dates of what's going to go on, here's what is actually going to transpire at the event. And I'm talking the deck, you have a title page, and after that, it's maybe 3-4 slides max.
Hmm.
And that is all you need to socialize it, right? Now, if you are like, wow, my organization is so big, I don't know what to do. I can
Yeah.
never talk to this person. Then you have to find the influencers. who are those right hand people of those that can help you get it across the finish line. And so I know this is a practice that I've used regularly. I also stalk people. I have no shame when I need to get things done. But I certainly think if you can figure out who those people are that can be your allies and champions and your voice when you might not necessarily be there in the room yourself, that's incredibly helpful.
That's awesome. So when you have like the 3, 4 slides, like how do these conversations usually go? What are things that have served you well within these conversations?
Well, I think a lot of it goes in like the presentation itself. It's like giving it to them as a pre-read, even though it's like super quick for them to do, allows them to digest it, and making sure that the influencers also have it in advance, and that
Oh,
you have
wow.
socialized it before you share it with the ultimate like executives that you want to share it. Share it with the influencers first to get, what do they think their leader's going to say? So that you're prepared for how to respond when you get asked that question in person. That has been super successful for me, to get that information up front, and to suss it
Mhm.
out so that I'm more prepared when I have the conversation. I think also going in, the enthusiasm that you give in your presentation. I'm an introvert. People don't believe me when I say that, but I kid you not, it's
Yeah.
real. But I go into it like a cheerleader. Hey, I'm so excited to be, telling you about whatever, because that is contagious. Like when you do that, right? And
Yeah.
so I think in these conversations, giving them exactly, be prepared for all the questions, right? You should know when you've created your event plan, like you should know all the details and the nuances. That shouldn't be what's in the deck, because at an executive level, they don't need all of that detail, but you should be prepared to answer the questions. And if you get a question that you don't know the answer to, that's okay. Just say, you know what, that's a great thing for me to consider. Let me go back and get the information and I'll return it to you. And so it just keeps the conversation going. And I think the more you learn your leaders and what they're looking for, the more prepared you'll be in going into the conversation.
And how are you thinking about like the budget piece? Like I think right now a lot of people are going into annual planning. Some people are already getting back, like we have no budget for like some of these requests. Like what is your mindset and like how do you often tackle feedback like that?
So from a budget perspective, when I think of budgets, obviously I think that a lot of companies have scaled back their budgets from what it
Yeah.
was pre-pandemic, right? And so I think it's actually uh, a good thing right now to kind of reset, because like back in the
Mm,
day, it was like the large, holiday parties,
yeah.
and these big, large events. But like, maybe now is a great opportunity to reset on what's possible, right? Because there's been such a
Mm,
hiatus. You can actually
yeah.
go into this and say, okay, if I have little to no money to spend, where do I want to put the most bang for my buck? What are employees going to look forward to most? And then think about, that's where you're going to focus your budget on. But then what are you going to do throughout the rest of the year? So there are things like, for example, when I was at Workday, we introduced play to wins. And this was something that was a survey that we would send out across the company. It wasn't a survey per se. It'd be like on national, on Pi Day, on March 14th.
Yeah.
We would send out a trivia question and ask folks to, answer the question. They had to, know something about pi to be able to solve this mathematical equation, right? And then all of those entries that, we asked them to give us their answer, and all of those entries were entered in for a chance to win, a prize. So when you think about the cost to do that, every employee was touched and engaged in some way in, that trivia, right? And if they chose to participate, but ultimately there's only one winner, right? So your cost from a budget perspective to send someone, a pie or, pies to their location, like is really, really low, but it has big impact, right? So thinking about creative ways in which you can infuse fun, whether it's through like, photo competitions or like Throwback Thursday photos, like we're doing that right now for Halloween, right? There's no cost
Love it.
associated with that, but there's still an engagement component. So you might have to really, think and brainstorm on things that you can do that are outside of a budget, right? Um, And I found that, there are definitely things that you can do. I remember when I first started in this space, there wasn't a lot of dollars, right? So we had to be very creative with what with what we had. And I realized that you can do a lot of things very frugally.
And with that, I know we're almost hitting time. So just like two more questions. And if anyone in the audience have questions for Sonia, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A section or within the chat. But Sonia, I did want to ask you as well, like, are there any cool hacks or pro tips or like creative ways that you've done in really supporting your own role or overall like employee engagement experience?
Yeah, I would say one of the first ones, get on the AI train with Chat GPT for sure. I was thinking about, I was going to sit down to write something. Yesterday was World Inclusion Day. And so I was like, I wonder if I could use Chat GPT to like pull something together for me. So I went in and any sort of chat feature like that, or AI, it's based off the questions you put in. So if you are very clear on what you ask, with whether it's about the tone, the length, you give it all the information and it's going to give you something that you could leverage. Now, the caveat to this is definitely do not put any of your, company information in there, because that's just going to be within there forever. But things, when you think about like things like Inclusion Day or Hispanic Heritage Month, and maybe wanting to highlight, different people, that's all up for grabs. And so if you leverage that and do that, you do have to fact check depending on what it is that
Yes.
you're pulling together. But I used it for, Halloween, like I need some snazzy headlines for, a Halloween email, right? Gave me a ton to choose from, right? So definitely use that as a resource, because I consider that an extension of my team. Is now I have this, back in the day, the extension of my team was Google, right? But now I get to add this as an additional tool to leverage and use.
But Sonia, that wraps up most of my questions. We do have a few Q&A. Before we dive into that, Sonia, any other thoughts or things that we could have addressed?
I would just say that like the work that you all are doing, that we are all doing collectively in this space, like it is really, really important work, because it's influencing the lives of people in a space where we spend most of our workday. So definitely give yourselves a round of applause and pat on the back that you're investing time on calls like this to, learn from others, because we're doing such important work for companies. So kudos.
I agree. But with that, we'll wrap up with two Q&As here, and then we'll have our outro. But with that, Sonia, Joseph here is asking about how could KPIs be done in a holistic approach towards enhancing strengths while also addressing the weaknesses, and how could managers tackle businesses within a team? So I think this is kind of a twofold, really targeted about like KPIs and how you think about that.
I think one of the things when I think about this, when it comes to the surveys and the employee engagement surveys that companies do, it's really about making sure that you have you're looking at that data, and it's not just, oh yeah, this is great, like I'm glad people told us these things, but it's coming with an action plan of what it is that you need to do, and really think about how you can move that needle. So a lot of this is driven by managers, because it's the managers' interactions are the ones that really drive the employee perceptions of the company. But at the same time, it's like the work that we do just kind of helps amplify, the greatness of what the company is. So I would say that, lean into the action planning, and be honest where there's weaknesses. Because I think if you just, that's like the elephant in the room. If you don't acknowledge, like, this is an area that's not going well. I know at one company I worked at, I did an audit, and I was a new hire and did an audit. And I was very candid with my assessment, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to get better. Do a SWOT analysis. If you do that, only one square is positive. Every other square is an area of opportunity. And so when you have a company that's bought in and wants to make change, you'll know in that exercise what you'll be able to deliver on.
I love that. And last question for you, Sonia, Diana here is asking, how do you ensure scalability doesn't get in the way of creativity?
Ooh, that's a good question. For
Mm,
me, it's like I think I'm creative in this space, and it's like creativity, you can do all of the fun things that you want to do. Like that's fantastic, but you also have to be realistic with what you can do from a scalability perspective. During my time at Workday, the company grew so rapidly that I literally couldn't do, our team couldn't do the same thing twice,
mm,
because of the fact that, you had another 1,000 people the following year, that were joining in on the company. So I
true.
think be realistic. Like you can still find ways to be creative. Because I think, a lot of us get inspired by that creativity component, but find ways to channel it that are going to be most impactful for the project that you're working on. But I certainly think that as a company scales, it just gives more challenges to think about, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, definitely exciting challenges with scalability. But with that, everyone, that wraps up our conversation with Sonia today. I guess, well, before I share my screen and have her outro, Sonia, if people wanted to find you, connect after, how's best they could do that?
I am on LinkedIn, definitely reach out there. And I'm trying to build my thought leadership by doing some posts as well. So I'll hopefully be sharing more in the future about employee engagement.
Amazing. But with that, then I'm going to share my screen. Everyone for joining us today with Sonia here. Again, as mentioned, if you do want to connect with Sonia after, you can always find her on LinkedIn. And we'll also be sharing takeaways with everyone via email tomorrow. With that, thank you again for joining us today. We're Epoch. If you ever want to chat more about anything discussed today, or you know someone that would also be great like Sonia today for us to feature, please let us know.